All right, let's get started. Welcome. My name is Kristen Brooks, Executive Director with the Riverside County Office of Education and Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. And on behalf of our team, we welcome you to this session number 2 of our Paraeducator series. We are delighted to have Caitlin and Adi joining us from Chime Institute. This session is being recorded and archived. It will be uploaded to the Padlet, and Janelle has dropped that link, and she'll probably continue to drop that link in the chat for you to be able to access the Padlet with previous webinars and resources, as well as all future webinars and resources going forward. Your mics are muted and your videos are off in order for us to focus on our ASL interpreter and our presenters today. So please feel free to use the chat and exchange with one another or ask the panelists any questions, and just be sure that you're sending a message to either just the panelists or all panelists and participants as you drop down in the chat box. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So Adi and I are excited to be with you today for a small presentation called Leveraging Inclusive Practices, Accommodations and Modifications as the Foundation for Inclusion. So I'm Caitlin. I'm the assistant principal over at Chime, and I'm going to pass it over to Adi to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Adi Buczynski. I'm a longtime special educator at Chime and working part-time as a special educator and part-time as our special education teacher on special assignment. And para training is something near and dear to my heart and Caitlin's heart, and we're very excited to be with all of you today.
Indeed. All right. So how do teachers increase students' ability to access the curriculum? So as paraprofessionals, as assistants in a classroom, as lead teacher, co-teacher, administrator, everyone who works in an inclusive setting is kind of a holder of this responsibility to make sure that all of the students can access the curriculum. So we have universal design for learning, which is a concept that creates more access points, meaning more students can access the lesson. And it really comes from architecture, the idea that anyone could walk or roll into a building and access all of the features of the building. Think about a curb cut. Everyone benefits from a curb cut, right? Maybe someone who uses a wheelchair would benefit from a curb cut, but so might a new parent who has a big stroller, or a person who uses a cart to carry their groceries because maybe it helps support their back, or just a jogger who is feeling klutzy that day, right? The curb cut can really benefit a lot of people. So universal design for learning can be applied to the classroom too. Group work is a feature in a UDL, Universal Design for Learning setting, where the students can naturally support each other. And as adults, we can support the children in doing that for each other. Different roles will create differentiated expectations for the student's output. So that's the concept in UDL, that there's all kinds of ways to show what you know, from a good old-fashioned pencil paper test to using an iPad or an AAC device to communicate, to making a flip grid. Right now that we're in distance learning, we've had all kinds of clever ways for students to show us what they know. And Adi, is there anything you wanted to do to kind of grow on this slide?
You covered it.
All right.
So we acknowledge that in an inclusive classroom, the strategies that Caitlin described are best practices for creating a lot of access points and a lot of ways for students to engage with the learning. But there are going to be materials or activities that might not be a perfect match for a student or multiple students in the classroom, and we might need to make some adaptations to that work. So we're going to talk about 2 different ways to adapt work. So the first way is an accommodation. So an accommodation is a change made to the environment, the curriculum, the instruction, the assessment practices, any of the things happening in the classroom that do not fundamentally alter or lower the expectations in instructional level. So accommodations are changes that we're making to how the students accessing their learning or how they're outputting what they know that do not change their connection with the Common Core standards or whatever standards are appropriate in that classroom. If they're in 4th grade, they're still doing the 4th grade Common Core standards, or just maybe giving them a little bit of support along the way. So we have some examples for you on the next slide. Many of these I'm sure that you've used in your practices: extended time, fewer problems, maybe the student's only doing the odd problems, not the whole page, letting the student dictate their response so they don't have to take their hand and write all of the letters and words that they need. to share their ideas, using graphic organizers, maybe typing an assignment instead of handwriting it, highlighting important information. Maybe you're taking the paper and you're kind of circling some key features in a word problem before they're doing the work. Sentence starters to help get their ideas going. Maybe some students have audiobooks. They're listening to the content instead of using their decoding skills along with their comprehension skills. Maybe they're getting a summary, like a Cliff Notes kind of version of a story. Maybe we have some color coding, some flashcards, some highlighters, sticky notes, some noise canceling headphones, calculator. These are all different accommodations, but the student is still doing fourth grade work if they're in fourth grade, or seventh grade work if they're in seventh grade. These are just little tools to help them approach the activity or the lesson in a way that works better for them.
Nice. And all of these bells and whistles that Adi just walked us through, a student might have that authored into their IEP as an accommodation that, they're legally held to have. But they're also just nice classroom strategies, right? You might try things out with a student just to see if it helps them access it. And then maybe the teachers need to have an ongoing conversation of exploring, formalizing some of these tools. But a lot of these tools are what we would just call like embedded accommodations or universal supports. I do better with a sticky note, and I don't have any paperwork saying I do better with a sticky note, because you're not changing the standard. That's really the key difference or the key element of an accommodation. Lecture notes. So over here we have two different approaches. Both have, on the left, we've got closed notes. We've got some fill in the blank boxes. We have a nice picture that's visual, helping the student visualize the problem. So these might be things authored into an IEP. I also notice it's visually less cluttered than a traditional math textbook might be. And it's also prepared ahead of time, right? A special educator or a general educator might have made this on a computer. On the right, what I see is what I might make one morning, like, man, Caitlin's really been having a hard time in chapter 3. She's going to need some notes. She has that in her 504 plan. I'm just going to bust this out at my desk with a pencil and paper, Xerox it, and I'm good to go. So two different ways to accommodate lecture notes.
Something else we do are to provide embedded support. So here's a nice example of color coding, some spacing we provided for the student. But if you look at the math problem on the left and the math problem on the right, they are inherently the same grade level standard. We're just taking that one little tiny box where the student's supposed to do all of their solving for all of the different parts of the problem. And gosh, that's really confusing and overwhelming. And we're just saying, hey, let's answer the first question in this box. Let's answer the second part in this box, the third part in this box, the fourth part in this box. But we're not giving the student any of the numbers or scaffolding it any more than just laying out the paper in a way that might help them organize their thoughts about all of these columns and regrouping that happen in those 4th, 5th, 6th grades. And again, this is something that might just be helpful for all students in the class as they're beginning to target these problems. We would hope that most students in the class would be able to sort of graduate from the color-coded, broken down version to the just one block of text. We would hope that they would be able to get there by the end of the unit with all of our teaching. But there are students who, because of their 504 plan or their IEP accommodations, will continue to need the color-coded spaced out version.
And it's all good because you're not changing that Common Core standard. You're just giving them different paths, different curb cuts to get there. All right, so what is a modification? So notice we've got the big red text. Students can only receive modified work if it is specifically designated in their IEP. I guess I'm going to add a little asterisk in that under the guidance of a teacher, perhaps a team might experiment with some modifications to see how a student does or doesn't do, to then bring that to an IEP meeting. But really, modified curriculum is designated in an IEP. It's called alternative curriculum. And that team, which the key player is also the parents, has consented that this is the right pathway for the student to navigate their education. So modified work is different. You have changed the standard. It should be meaningful and it should be related to the general education curriculum. And this is sort of like the crux of the inclusive classroom. When you have a student who uses modified curriculum to access instruction and it's delivered simultaneously or in an embedded way in the gen ed classroom. It takes some masterful planning and teaching and collaboration with paraprofessionals, but it can be done. So we've changed on the right, it's saying we've changed the environment or the curriculum or the way we're instructing or the way we assess, and we do fundamentally change the expectation in the instructional grade level or the content or the performance criteria. So if you went to 6th grade English inferencing, the student might be doing something wildly different, but maybe you're thinking of creative ways to embed that. Anecdotally, I'll share that I once worked with a student who used an AAC device or an iPad type of device to communicate. And we cleverly made their core word practice. They were acquiring some core words on their device and basic vocabulary into the unit based on a novel that the whole class was reading. So while that student might not have been reading that particular novel, they were working on their word work in a parallel way. So then it shows that the peers like, oh yeah, this student's working on something pretty similar to me. Like, we're reading this book, their words are related to this book. It all goes together. And paraprofessionals are really critical players in this sort of dance that we're doing to make sure the modified curriculum is delivered in the gen ed setting.
And I think sometimes it's, in the example Caitlin gave, that's a really easy for us to identify. That's different work. That's easier work. This is a modification. But I think sometimes we get into sort of a gray area, and we even internally on our campus have these discussions constantly. Have we crossed over into modification territory? So like if we think back to that word problem example, we broke up the page and scaffolded it for the student, but we didn't make it easier. But it would be a modification if we maybe set up the problems for the students. So those big modifications are easy to see, but sometimes we have to check each other as professionals and say, I feel like that actually crossed over into modification territory. Like he wasn't pulling the numbers out of the word problem himself. You gave him the word problem numbers. Is that something that we feel like we need to discuss in the IEP? And students don't just one day, as Caitlin said, like poof, now we're on modified curriculum. There are conversations that happen along the way. So maybe this is part of that pathway of conversations, but modifications can have a really big spectrum, I think is what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, and Adia, I appreciate what you said, because I always think when I'm working with a paraprofessional or training, or even myself, I always think, who's doing the math? Is Miss Healy doing the math right now, or is Johnny? Like, it's called, in education jargon, it can be called cognitive lift. We so want to see the student do well. We're coaching them, we're giving them all their supports, and then it's like, whoops, like who solved the math problem here? So let's see if I lost my little slide toggle. Let's make sure it goes. Ta-da.
So here's an example of one of those like bigger level modifications that we were talking about. Island of the Blue Dolphins is a classic at our school in 4th grade. I imagine many of your schools also read it. And Island of the Blue Dolphins is a complicated text. So this set of modified text and modified comprehension work was for a student on alternate curriculum, a student who's receiving modifications to the curriculum. And he also happened to be a student who uses an AAC device. He uses an iPad to communicate. So a lot of these icons related to his communication goal. He was working on some sight words, pre-primer sight words. Those are red in the text so he can see them. So I just want you to imagine our 4th grade class. The class is reading chapter 6 aloud. The teacher's pausing periodically to elicit feedback from students, ask comprehension questions. So this student on modified curriculum is sitting with a paraprofessional or a special ed teacher and kind of going over his sentences in his chapter. And then the teacher pauses and the student raises his hand and says, "New chief not come." And the teacher says, "Yes, that's fantastic. You're right. The new chief did not come back." Who can find the passage in the text that helps demonstrate that? So the student is actively participating in the chapter 6 Island of the Blue Dolphins conversation that's happening. He's sharing, his peers are seeing him as someone who knows stuff and is able to contribute to the classroom. He's able to feel really good because I said something and my teacher, acknowledged that in front of all of my classmates. But you can see that the level of work is very different from the comprehension activity that a typically developing fourth grader would be completing.
And I would imagine that the instructors, when they designed it, there's no accidents here, right? Maybe this person had a sight word goal, and they're collecting IEP data with this permanent product. They're also collecting data like did this person have a novel expression today, right? Like they participated in class. We know from the research that students are much more peer motivated, and they're going to generalize what they know in that sort of supportive, meaningful, natural setting rather than our more contrived, discrete trial that you might associate with applied behavior analysis. And those things are not wrong, they're good practices. This is just different, and we want to celebrate inclusive practices today and help you feel competent and ready to coach kids through doing that as well. So putting it all together, and believe it or not, there's trying teachers. We need to refresh, like Adi said, we're always in conversation like, ooh, are we in an accommodation world? Or are we in a modified world? So on our far left, we have the sort of typical assignment, text heavy, open-ended questions, one visual. Our accommodated, which I would argue, like, who doesn't like a picture, right? We've got 3 rich pictures that are probably prompting the student to think critically about the Earth's many layers in the crust. We have a little more fill in the blank, kind of a selection response. So again, we've not changed what we want to know that the student knows. The standard is the same. We've just changed how they can show it. And then on the far right, we changed the standard, right? It is much more simplified, but still it's not like the students just working on, Caitlin's special portfolio of Caitlin IEP goal work. It is really tied to the gen ed curriculum. So it's still about rocks. He's learned the 3 different types of rocks. Again, we have the sight word practice there. I see embedded picture enrichment on the text, tells me that the student's using a uniform PEC system, picture exchange communication, or some sort of reading program. It's not just, a cute man looking above the word look. There's a reason why he's there. So someone deliberately created that. And then there's that open-ended response, probably to coach and practice on the AAC device to get the student writing on their iPad. So again, far right, typical, same as the standard. Accommodated, same as the standard. Modified, different from the standard. We changed the standard. And I don't say that to be didactic. I say it because I still need reminding sometimes.
Okay, so those are the 2 types of adapted work options that there are. So you probably, as we're going through this, are thinking of the students that you work with and thinking, oh yeah, this is a student who gets accommodated work, or I work with a student who gets modified work. And now we're going to talk through, how do you make this stuff? And sometimes you're being provided those materials. The examples we had up on the screen were conceived during a co-planning session with the special education and general education teacher there. They were prepared in advance, printed out in advance, and the paraprofessionals walked into the room with everything that they needed. But sometimes in your roles, you're having to on the fly quick make something for a student, or maybe it is part of your job responsibilities to create some student materials. So we're going to talk through making this stuff. I just want to pause before we get into that. If anybody has any questions on the difference between accommodations and modifications, or a more example specific situation that you wanted to ask before we move into the logistics of how to make all these adaptations. Give it a minute.
Not seeing anything in the chat or in the Q&A right now.
All right, that tells us we're ready to move
and
on.
Adi and I have presented together before, and Adi, I think we're going to be on target to have a little 10-minute leftover for some Q&A. So please don't be shy. It's a nice opportunity for us to hear from you too. We're selfish. We like to learn from you as much as you're probably, hopefully, learning something here. So whenever we're doing any sort of accommodations or modifications on the spot, you as a paraprofessional are interpreting that gen ed classroom. Like you are the eyes and ears and nose and mouth and senses processing it all. You want to make sure that your target student or students understand the point of the assignment. So there's often many layers to an assignment, and you need to isolate only one. Maybe you got these beautiful pre-made materials, maybe you didn't, and now you're kind of flying by the seat of your proverbial pants. So group participation, you're thinking, is the point for this person to be integrated and with their peers having a back and forth conversation? You're thinking, is it understanding friction, like the main concept of that science lesson with the different plate tectonics? Like, is that what you really need to be hitting home with your student? Is it learning vocabulary words and finding like 101 special ways to help that person really know key content vocabulary terms? Or is it practicing opinion writing, right? Stating what your opinion is, learning how to think, what's the difference between an opinion and a fact? So really, until you isolate the thing you want to do, you're not going to go anywhere. So you got to really think about it. And you might need to collaborate with another para, collaborate with the gen ed teacher, those on the spot moments. If the students are doing their silent sustained reading after recess, hey, Miss Healy, what are we doing during science? Adi is she's irritated. We don't understand what to do. Like, what's the thing we really want to see Adi be able to do? So then you can refine your approach and use some of the strategies that we've talked about today.
All right, so there is no one correct way to make a modification or an accommodation. And I see in the Q&A we had a question for the modified curriculum, must it be a drawing or picture? The answer is no. It needs to be something that's appropriate for the student. So you need to be deliberate about all of these factors. And again, there's no one right answer. This is individualized work per a student's individualized education plan. So it should look different from student to student. So you need to be deliberate about the ratio of pictures to text. How big is the font? What size is the font? And where is it on the page? Sometimes students really want their work to look as similar to the typical work as possible. So they want a lot of text on the page. For some students, that's overwhelming. Some students need like a picture and a sentence on a page, and then the next page is a picture and a sentence. Some need it more condensed. You just need to know your student and try different ways and figure out what works for them. You need to think through, how are we highlighting or making text bold? Are we doing the sight words bold? Are we doing vocabulary words bold? Are we working on verb tenses? And the verbs are all going to be highlighted in some way. You want to think about the complexity of the language. The way that we pared down the language in that Island of the Blue Dolphins example was very purposeful. It wasn't too easy for the student. We're not just trying to make it really, really easy. We want to make it just right level of difficulty for that student. So if they're reading at a second grade level, you want that text to be at the second grade level. You don't want it to be at a kinder level, because that's not challenging them. That's not pushing them towards better reading skills. You want to think about how the student is going to provide output. It shouldn't be a passive learning activity, right? The best kinds of learning involve the student. So we want to make sure that they are in some way engaged. Are they circling things? Are they pointing to things? Are they using a different communication device to output their knowledge? Are they dictating? You want to be deliberate about whether you're using icons, like we had in the examples, or real pictures, or realia, like actual stuff. We've done the rock cycle activity with students, and instead of having pictures of the rocks, we've had the actual rocks because the pictures weren't meaningful for the student at that time. We want to be cognizant of repeated text features. So if there's a point we're trying to hit home, we're going to say that a lot. That modified rock example, we said there are different kinds of rocks on every single page in the whole packet, because that was the key concept we wanted the student to walk away with. You want to make sure there are I skipped one. You want to make sure that the amount of work output is manageable, challenging, but manageable for the student. You want to make sure that there are directions for the student on the student's work, and that there are directions for the adult if you're not going to be the adult doing the activity with the student. You want to maybe even just on a Post-it jot down, like, here's my vision for how you're going to do this. Really focus on the word different. That's the key concept for today. And you want to make sure that whatever stuff you're taking out, you're purposeful about that. You don't want to accidentally take out a really key concept or a really key plot event in paring down the text. So again, all of these are things to consider. There's no one way to make a good accommodation or a good modification. You just need to think through, what does my target student need in all of these different areas? It's kind of a fun puzzle. I love doing it.
It is a fun puzzle, and it's making me think too that when you're really applying UDL principles, I've done it both ways. Like sometimes you've got like a little box of stuff because you know it's going to bring the lesson alive for your target student. Usually all the students like it, right? So if you know that you're studying the gold rush in 4th grade and you have a little vial of that fake gold they sell at whatever gold rush field trip you went on, I would buy one for every table group because chances are everyone's going to be pumped about the fake gold and it might really unlock the lesson for your target student. So finding ways to let everyone embrace these modified supports that are honestly going to help. It's not going to take away. It's not like the student now has had the standard altered and they're not going to understand the gold rush appropriately. They're going to think, oh, there was really fun gold in Miss Paczynski and Miss Healy's class. God, I love the gold rush. And that other student, the vocabulary term now really has a place to attach in their mind. They've had this experience on the field trip in their classroom with the vocab, with all kinds of different support. So they're really generalizing what they know, because that's our job as teachers, right? Is to just make sure that they know it as best as they can. All right.
And
now,
before we jump to our lovely paraprofessionals who we interviewed, there was a question in the chat and one in the Q&A that I just wanted to tackle. So Jillian asked a great concern. Sometimes teachers and paras have trouble keeping track of which accommodations each child receives. So the accommodations are not happening with fidelity. So any strategies on how to increase implementation?
This is not, I love your question because we still struggle with it at Chime, though we do it. Keeping track of who receives what accommodation. I mean, good old spreadsheet. We do have para training on Friday mornings, and I might call my own team as a sped teacher who works with me to review it. But I once saw at another training, a woman had a beautiful tracker of all of the universal accommodations where she'd just tick who had what. And it was like a little insert that the team members in the classroom had. I know you're not trying to get a new fashion look and it's distance learning, but at Chime, we've had paraprofessionals wear aprons where they can kind of keep their tools and tricks. And I wonder if a little one pager like that, if you're still grasping who gets what, is helpful. You can just kind of discreetly look at it, like maybe you're out at supervision during recess. Because I know I need a tool to keep track of all of the things. Do you want to talk a little bit about our data binders, Adi? Would that make sense?
Yeah, so in every classroom on campus, we have a red binder, and the red binder is that key, like all information that you need about the students in this class is in here. We have 504 information, we have allergy information. This is like, hey, I'm a substitute in the classroom. I'm gonna go to the red binder and I'm gonna have just the down and dirty, this is what I need to know about this class. So in there, we have things called quick glances, which is like a 1-page cheat sheet about students' IEP goals, their accommodations, what their work should look like, how to involve them in the classroom, in whole group lessons. It's really just a cheat sheet on the students. And so we make sure on there to list the students' accommodations. And for our older students, we also empower them to know what their accommodations are and to work on some self-advocacy, like, hey, I need noise buffers, or hey, I'm supposed to get the version of this assessment that has a word bank. I need the word bank. The word bank works for me. So we do some self-advocacy training for our older kids again. But I would say the key feature is to write it down somewhere that everyone's going to look. So you need to take a look at your systems at your school or in your classroom. What is a place that people go to frequently? Is it something that is physically on your body? Obviously being discreet with student information, using code names or something. If they're going to be wearing it, other kids might see it. Do we have like a binder where everyone's looking? Is there like the teacher plan book? Is that where everybody checks in every day? Wherever the eyes of everyone in the classroom are, that's where you want to document that information.
And indeed, it's making me think that all teachers are at different places in their journey of running a collaborative classroom. I know that in the beginning of my career, I was a little more the queen of my castle, and sometimes a gen ed teacher, you might be still doing some culture building at your school. I don't know where everyone's school site is at, but where a paraprofessional should know what the lesson plan is. You should know where the materials are that need to be distributed, because chances are you're going to be one of the people helping to make that happen. And if that's still stuff that's getting laid out at your school site, hopefully there's administrators or coaches or lead teachers who are helping carry that work. Because if it's a paraprofessional, like you have your eyes on your target student, really making sure they're integrated. That's not the sort of work that you need to be doing on a day in and day out basis. But I do know it's way easier when you can just walk into that classroom. Like, I know that there's like 5 adults who are going to work in my classroom. They're all as competent as me. I need them. They need me. I want to get you the info you need so you know who needs what accommodation, and we're not wasting time figuring all that out.
And we want to be discreet about it. I worked at a previous school where someone was like, hey, let's just put the accommodated tests on blue paper and then I'll know what they are. And I said, but then all the kids know what they are. And then the kids are feeling like, oh, and now everyone knows that I got the accommodated test. And maybe I feel some kind of way about that. So we want whatever system we have to be kind of discreet. Like, I know we have grade levels at Chime that have like a coding system with like a star or a triangle or a square on the corner of the math test. And nobody knows what those mean except the teachers. The teachers know, oh, these are the kids on the list of, getting the square version of the test. And these kids get the star version of the test. So whatever it is, just make sure it's discreet.
Yeah. All right. Well, now we get a gift, right? Is it time, Adi?
I think it's time.
Hear from Miss Betty, one of our wonderful paraprofessionals. She's worked with a variety of students, including a lot of students who do have some significant needs. So she's going to talk about making on the spot or in the moment modifications. So she is changing the curriculum. So let's hear from Betty. All right, we are on. Welcome. So today we have Miss Baczynski, our TOSA from Chime. We have Miss Betty Mendez, one of our fabulous paraprofessionals. Go ahead and wave, Betty. And then we've got me, Caitlin Healy, assistant principal over at Chime. And we're just lucky today because Betty is going to walk us through how she modifies an assignment on the spot. Maybe it's happened to you, but you're in class supporting your target student. The work that's happening in the room might not be the type of work that you've been addressing in the IEP goals. So you're thinking on your feet, how can I make this relevant to the student I'm supporting, making sure they get access to the gen ed instruction and they get work at a level that's appropriate to them kind of in a pinch. So Adi is going to go ahead and show us the general education Go Math workbook that we use in 4th grade.
All right, here we are. So lesson 3.4, this is something that our 4th grade students are all doing. I might look at this page and say, those visuals are not going to work for my student. Let me flip forward and see if the next page looks better. Okay, the visual organization on this page is not working. Let's see. Oh, great. Here are some problems that we can tackle with a little more depth, and Betty's going to talk us through how she's going to make these problems meaningful.
So what I would do in a class setting, I would look at the problems and see if my student is able to do the work that is being asked from him. And just looking at it, 12 times 12 would be too much steps for him to do because he is using an AAC device or any communication devices. So I would break it down and I would put 12 times 6. So it can become a shorter problem that he is able to do, or she. And then I would go step by step with it. So I would go 2 times 6, and then I would ask the certain student that I worked with, we would use 2 whiteboards to do the work. So I'm going to do it as if I am working with that student. So I would say, okay, so what is 2 times 6? And I would grab a different color and I would just like circle it. And then I would come here and give him options on this whiteboard. So I'm going to write down, and he would use a field of 3, and I'm going to show you what that is. And I'm going to give him on 1 square, I'm going to give him the correct answer. So 2 times 6 would be 12. I'm gonna give him a wrong one that would be drastically different, 3, and then something else, or I don't know. And so I would go one by one with him using the partner assisted scanning. So I would be saying, is it 3? Is it 12? Something else, or I don't know, and then go one by one. Is it 3? And then give him a wait time. And then is it 12? And if he would choose 12, circle it, and then go back to our other whiteboard and then put down 12. And then we could do it in purple. That way he can know like the differences, because color coding helps a lot with students. So then we would move down and then go, okay, so we did 2 times 6 is 12. So now we're going to move on. What is 6 times 1? And then so I would go like this. What is 6 times 1? And then I would go back to the field of 3 whiteboard and give him different options. And then, okay, so it's 6 times 1, and then give him the correct answer on this side. That way he, like the student isn't used to answering only on one side, because then he's gonna know, oh, the correct answers are on the right side, not on the left side. And then I'm going to give him a really big different number. I'm gonna say like 37. Okay, so it's 6 times 1, 6, and then do again the partner assisted scanning, and then go through our options and always give him a wait time, a good, like, depends on the student. I like to give 10 to 12 seconds just so that they can have enough time to answer. And then we go back, and then sometimes you can hold up both whiteboards so that they can go back and forth and like see, okay, so this is what we're doing. This is like what I'm answering to. If it's not too overwhelming. And then if, like, let's say he answers 37, we'll be like, oh, like, let's try it out. You can always go back and try it out, and then do like 6 times 1. And so I'll put 6 like little dots. Okay, and we could be like, okay, so we have 6, now let's multiply it by 1. If we multiply it by 1, that means we just leave it like that. So then we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we could say, oh, it's 6. And then go back to this one, show him, so it's not 37, it's 6. And then just write it down here. And then remind him that there's also a 1 up here. So then we go with a different marker in a different color. Color coding will be a best friend. And then circle that 1. Okay, we have 62, but now we have to add 1. And then go, okay, so what is 2 plus 1? And then we go back, and it's a lot of back and forth. And we go back to our field of 3, and then we're going to give him the options. Okay, what is 2 plus 1? And then I'm going to put it on the same side, just because I'm going to, for the next option, I'm going to put it on the opposite side, so it can confuse them a little bit.
And Miss Betty, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think I'm having a math moment where I might need some help. Are we adding the 1 in the right spot when we're regrouping? Because we're adding it not to the 1's place. But
no, we're adding it to the, you're right. Thank you for doing it.
That's okay, yes. We're modding on the spot. We're flexible.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to put it down here, right here. Thank you for catching that. Okay, so what is 6 plus 1? And then we're going to go back, and I had put here, I'm going to put 7, the correct answer, and then let's put 3, what I had on the other side. And then what we can do also to help the student out is go back to this and then give like, and then using the whole board, it's gonna help you out too. So you can like erase this and then draw another model. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus, and then down here, 1. And then we can have him That way he can have two options to do it like mentally, or he can count and we count with them. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we have 6. What would it be if we add one more? And then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. And then we'll go back to this board and then be like, okay, so since we counted and we know how much it is in total, what would your answer be? Would it be 7, 3, something else, or I don't know? And then it just keeps going like that. And if he answers 7, then we put 7s down here. It'll be 72.
Woohoo!
Just like that.
Thank you, Betty. That was a wonderful way to show us how you break down a problem on the spot in a gen ed setting. There's a lot happening. The work might look radically different. You use so many different tools. You taught us about color coding. You taught us about partner-assisted scanning with assistive technology devices. So we just know that paraprofessionals are often the people who have the most expertise on a particular student, right? They might be working with that student really closely all day. And that's something we really appreciate about you, Betty, is that you really know your target students inside out and you get it done at the end of the day with their interest at heart. So thanks for sharing your skills with us.
No problem. Hopefully you guys get it, like learn something from it. Yeah.
And I just wanted to acknowledge that that was a juggling act she just did, a cognitive juggling act of, how to organize this for the student, which marker am I using, what is the math concept that I'm trying to teach, and then also, this was a nice quiet Zoom with just Caitlin and I, but in a classroom, there's, the kids are coming, someone came and asked you if they can use the restroom, the teacher gave a direction, you had to pause, you're managing the perhaps medical self-care needs of a student that you're working with. So there's a lot. And I also wanted to acknowledge that Ms. Betty did one problem really, really thoroughly. And that has so much more value than trying to fly through the whole worksheet and have all the problems done. And, to go back to what Caitlin was saying before, like who really did the math? On this problem, we can say that the target student did the math. There was some teaching. Ms. Betty talked us through what she would do if the student was struggling with the problem, but ultimately the student was doing the math problem. And this is a great time to use that accommodation of doing fewer problems. Maybe the student is going to do 2 problems really, really well and thoroughly and have ownership over them and perhaps share their answer with the class. And that's what's happening in math today. We don't need to try and fly through 12 problems just to have the page done at the expense of the students learning.
And a nice moment, like I am surprised Betty only made one slight error, right? She just wrote it in the wrong place value, which could make a big difference for the student, but she's also modeling mistakes, right? Like I know the student she works with, like he's got a good sense of humor and might have even called her out later in the day, like Betty got it wrong. And that's part of relationship building and being a good adult in a kid's life, right? Adults make mistakes all the time and we're okay and we move on. So hats off to Betty. And we know we're kind of hitting you with the videos here at the end. But we have another great paraprofessional from Chime. Oh, we're still looking at Betty. I want to go to Miss Steph. Here she is.
And Miss Healy, on this one,
yes.
Can we do it in full screen mode so that it's a little larger?
I hope so. Bear with me, okay? So Miss Steph's gift is relationship building with students, particularly who might have a hard time socially at school. They're not on modified curriculum. I want you to imagine maybe if you've ever worked with a kid who kind of comes in face down, hood up, and takes like 30 minutes to warm up to just like being in the world on that day. So she has a really quiet, caring stance with those students, and she really learns about their affinities to kind of build inroads with them. So then she can place academic demands on them. So here we go big. And I'll only have one round of captioning, so we don't have to read it twice. And Miss Steph, can you see the recording button? Yeah. Okay, well, we are here with the wonderful Steph, who is a great Chime employee, who has worked as a paraprofessional, a special education assistant, a general education substitute, a general sub for our school. She is wearing many hats. And the thing I love about Steph is her ability to build relationships with students She's very caring and empathetic and is able to wear the perspective of the student and really see things from their point of view, including their social emotional state and how that might affect their ability to do academically. So we are here today to talk a little about how to make an on-the-spot accommodation for a math test. So Steph, we're thinking of this student that we once shared, Tom. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this person presented and how you might approach this math test with him?
Yes, the first thing I would do before even this test, but I would ask the teacher in the classroom to see it prior to even any of the students receiving it, and then almost anticipating what he would feel overwhelming. And already he would probably be triggered by all of the language arts, all the words. Yes. So already from number 7 and number 8, he would be drawn to just completing number 8 first, and then referring back to number 7. And then the visual of the chart, he would really appreciate that just because it's helpful to him. And then rather than already going to 7, and then having to like circle the numbers that would help him complete the word problem.
Oh, nice. So you would go into the actual word problem and mark it up a little bit.
Yes.
I think that is a good detail to point out. And now I'm remembering, it just came to me. I think we also used a lot of sticky notes with this person to sort of limit set and make a to-do list. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, because he's still going to have to complete both problems. He would automatically, I would be anticipating that he would choose number 8. So telling him, okay, let's pick a problem. And then knowing that he would do 8, already have that set up for him, but always coming back to number 7 because it is going to be an expectation for him to complete it, but maybe not on the spot, and always coming back to it later when he's not going to be, he's going to be ready to complete it since he already finished the first one. And then maybe taking a break in between both problems.
Yes. So getting him feeling successful, giving him a built-in break, giving him the power of choice, like he got to choose number 8 and you knew him so well that you kind of previewed that might likely happen. And then you're holding to your limit because you have the little to-do list, like you still got to go back to do number 7. And if he got really resistant to doing number 7 and started exhibiting behaviors like hoodie up or head down, what sort of strategies did you use to kind of make accommodations on the spot to help guide him back to 7?
We could always complete the rest of the test and then coming back to number 7, and then like letting him know, because this is already, it's a test, so he already knows the material. It's just maybe he's gonna feel like he's not gonna be ready to take the test, but always referring back to, we already know this information. This is just gonna be all the information gathered together. And then I remember Tom always being, not always being okay, but coming back from the break, he would be usually ready. And then if he's not, giving him more time.
Right. And not having a power struggle over the wrong thing, knowing that extended break was something Tom could handle and that he's going to come back more regulated, more eager to do it, and building this confidence, right? It sounds like you're really keeping it positive and helping keep him and his self-esteem intact so that he can do these problems that are challenging for him, but he has already been exposed to.
Yes.
Well, that's super helpful, Miss Steph. I really appreciate you chiming in here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. Watch me fumble here and see. And scene. All right. I'm going to go to the next slide, Adi. Let's see how that goes. Oh, we're still in YouTube. We don't want to be in YouTube anymore. And Miss Steph, can you see the?
So we aimed in this presentation to sort of hit those middle grades. We on our campus serve TK to 8th grade students. You can see we sort of hovered in that like 4th, 5th grade realm. But I did see an ask in the chat for some younger examples. And we used the same principles in modifying or accommodating the work for younger students. So we might have like a kindergarten Go math activity, which may have.
Okay, we are here with the wonderful
I'm having
Steph,
a tech moment, Miss
China.
We're out of there. Thank God.
There we go. So we might have, the like 3 workbook pages in our Go Math workbook the student is meant to target in the math lesson. So an accommodation could be, hey, we're just going to do this first page, or we're going to do every other problem, something like that. For a student who just needed to have maybe a little less work, or maybe the student is dictating their answers. They're telling you the number sentence, or they're telling you what teen number they counted to. And maybe the student is telling you, oh, 17. Wow, remind me, how do I write 17? Which number comes first? Which number comes second, right? Because figuring out how to write 17 is a hard part of kindergarten. So we might just have them talk through, or maybe they're finding number stamps and stamping their answer onto the page. Those would be some accommodations they might do. For a student on modified curriculum who's maybe not working on counting to teen numbers or not working on addition problem, they might do part of the activity. So maybe they're not ready for the whole addition problem. Their IEP says they're just working on counting to 5. So maybe they're just working on one of the add-ins, and they're going to count it, and they can raise their hand. The teacher can say, what's the first add-in? And the student can say 4. They counted the 4. They're participating in class. And then the class will continue on with adding another add-end and calculating what the sum is. So that's just kind of a kinder example to help you relate it for the person who is asking. And we have another example here, Miss Healy.
I know. We really went for the math. That's not to say you can't do all this for ELA. I guess we were just in a math mood when we made the presentation. So this is kind of a hypothetical now that you know what you know. What would you do? So recess just ended. Joey is frustrated because he had the wrong snack. I relate to Joey in his lunch bag, and then a peer stepped on his toe. So he sounds like he's still living in the past. And it's time now for Joey to do math, and it's his least favorite subject after this wretched recess. So the teacher passes out the assignment, and it looks like that. I see a bunch of word problems, womp womp, right? That could set someone over the edge who just had a bad recess with the wrong snack and a stepped on toe. So what might you guys do? You can type it in the chat and we'll monitor that, because I think you're all kind of muted. So we'll use the chat, right?
We'll give you a moment to formulate your answers. And again, there's no one right answer. So you might be thinking of a student that you work with, and they are Joey in this moment. So think about the whole range of students. Some examples, you could draw it out, ask the student if they need some more time before they're ready to start working. Yeah, sometimes it's not even worth putting the paper in front of them. Like, let's just deal with your regulation and your emotional state, and we'll tackle math when you're ready. Zones of regulation. Yep, we use that.
These are great answers. You guys already have a lot of tools in your tool bag. Sometimes I cut these things up. Some kids just do better when you put a strip of paper in front of them, and like maybe they do it in a notebook.
Or I see that. Cover up, take another piece of paper and put it up so they're only seeing some of it. Let the student talk about how they're feeling. See if the student needs a little break. Yeah. Kind of doing a first then, like first we got to work, then we can talk about the snack. Sometimes kids just need us as the grown-ups to help them, like we need to move on from the snack. We'll talk about it later. Let's refocus. Maybe just giving one problem at a time, having the student go on a pretend errand. Let's go take this over to the teacher in room 22, and then we'll come back and do the assignment.
It's a great one. Reset. These are all wonderful. You sound well equipped. And just in the spirit, we have about 4 minutes together, so I want to make sure we do it justice. Oh, we did justice. You can find us forever on our email, but feel free to use the chat again. Happy to field some questions right now.
And I was so grateful after our last presentation to get a couple of emails with follow-up questions. You know, we always offer, and I just love when people take us up on that. I see some more answers coming in. Maybe a student has a feelings journal. Maybe you're helping the student do one of the problems just to get them in the flow of things, and then you can sort of pull off your level of support. In that case, I would always kind of write a note to the teacher on there saying, oh, we did this problem together and it went so well, because then teacher grading the assignment knows problem number one, student had a lot of support on. First then chart. These are great examples. You're all very well equipped.
I'm going to go ahead and stop our screen share, but I know Kristen can hook you up with our contact information if you were not able to jot it down. And I just saw a raised hand from Mary. But I don't know if that's on purpose. I haven't been able to see anything because I was screen sharing.
Well, thank you both so much. That was fantastic, full of excellent examples, and just really, really appreciate you sharing all of your expertise with us today. I know that folks really enjoyed it, and I know that people are going to be using this series with their staff ongoing. So good information that'll just keep getting shared. I wanted to let you know also that Janelle is dropping in the chat the link to the Padlet, as well as links to the certificates that you can print out from session 1 and session 2 today. We had quite a few folks asking in the chat if they could get a certificate of completion. So she'll be sharing that with you in the chat box before we head out. And they're popping up right now if you can see them. Thank you so much, Janelle, for doing that, and Dawn for creating those on the fly. So again, thank you so much. I'll give it just a minute if anybody has any extra questions for you, additional questions. And then we want to thank our ASL interpreter so much for being here today and signing the duration of this webinar. So
Thank you.
All right, we'll give it another minute. Folks are saying thank you. And for those of you who are still logged on, join us December 10th for our next Paraeducators series, again, sponsored by Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. And a huge shout out to the California Department of Ed for making this free for participants and available to you all. So thank you so much. See you on December 10th.
Kristen, I see 2 people with their hands raised, digital hands raised. I don't know how we find out what they want to say.
Yeah, so we see Debbie and Mary. If you want to put in the chat any questions you might have.